At 32, I'm Daniel, a self-made man running a modest interior design firm in Austin, Texas. But my story begins long before the success when I was just a boy desperate for approval from parents who never truly saw me. Growing up, I lived in the shadow of my younger brother, Ryan, the golden child. No matter how hard I worked or how many accolades I earned, my efforts were met with indifference. When I won first place in a statewide academic competition, my parents barely glanced at the certificate. Yet, when Ryan brought home a second-place ribbon, they framed it and hung it proudly in the living room, a constant reminder that I would never be enough. Their obsession with appearances fueled their favoritism. Lavish parties and designer furniture masked their hollow lives. They cared more about what others thought than nurturing their own son's potential. This early betrayal planted seeds of doubt in my heart, shaping the man I am today, a man determined to rise above their shallow values and prove his worth. Growing up, I learned early on that love in my family was not unconditional, it was rationed, and Ryan always got the lion's share. When I graduated high school, my parents didn't even show up to the ceremony. Instead, they sent me a text saying they were busy shopping for Ryan's birthday gift. Busy? For a birthday? While their eldest son received his diploma alone, clapping for himself in an empty auditorium. But nothing cut deeper than the car accident, a moment when any parent should have dropped everything to rush to their child's side. I was driving home late one night when another vehicle ran a red light, slamming into my car. My leg was broken, my ribs cracked, and I spent 3 days in the hospital fighting off infections from internal injuries. Did my parents visit? No. They were too busy preparing for their weekend party, a lavish event where champagne flowed freely and guests praised their perfect life. All I got was a cold text. Do you need money? Money? Not concern. Not love. Just a transactional question, as if I were an inconvenience rather than their son. That night in the hospital, staring at the ceiling with pain throbbing through every inch of my body, I realized something profound. I would never rely on them again. Their indifference became my fuel. If they wouldn't support me, I'd build a life strong enough to make their opinions irrelevant. It was a cold winter evening, and Lily had been unusually quiet all day. Emma and I thought it was just fatigue from playing too much, but then came the cough, a persistent, rasping sound that echoed through our small apartment. At first, we dismissed it as a seasonal cold, but when her breathing became labored and she started clutching her chest, panic set in. That night, as Emma played with her on the living room floor, Lily suddenly froze mid-laugh. Her eyes widened, her tiny hands reached out for air, and then, she collapsed. "Mommy, I'm so tired," she whispered before going completely still. Emma screamed, scooping her up in a frantic embrace while shouting my name. I rushed over to see my daughter, my lively, radiant Lily, lying limp in her mother's arms, her breaths shallow and uneven. My heart pounded like a war drum as I grabbed her and ran to the car, breaking every traffic law to get to the emergency room. The drive felt like an eternity, each second stretching into hours as Lily's fragile body lay motionless against mine. When we finally arrived, doctors swarmed around us, shouting orders and attaching wires to her tiny frame. Then came the words that shattered me. "Your daughter has a congenital lung abnormality compressing her airway. She needs immediate surgery." The doctor's voice was calm, but his next sentence hit me like a freight train. $120,000 upfront before we proceed. My knees buckled. $120,000. The number reverberated in my skull, dragging me back to the countless times I'd told myself, "We're healthy, we don't need insurance yet." That decision, the one I postponed because I thought we were invincible, now loomed over me like a death sentence. How could I have been so reckless? How could I let this happen to my child? I gripped Emma's hand, trying to steady myself, but inside, I was drowning. Every ounce of guilt, fear, and regret crashed over me like a tsunami. We had no savings left, no safety net. All I could think about was finding a way to save Lily, even if it meant selling everything we owned or begging strangers on the street. But deep down, I knew there was only one place to turn: my parents. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope they might care enough to help. Yet, as I drove to their house later that night, rain pouring down and tears streaming down my face, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into another nightmare. The house was alive with laughter, music, and the clinking of crystal glasses when I arrived. My parents' grand party for Ryan's upcoming wedding was in full swing. Guests dressed in designer suits and gowns mingled under shimmering chandeliers, their voices blending with the soft hum of a live jazz band. The air smelled of expensive perfume and gourmet hors d'oeuvres. It was the kind of scene my parents lived for, where appearances mattered more than substance. But as I stepped inside, my heart heavy with desperation, none of it felt real to me anymore. I approached my parents, trying to keep my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you. It's urgent." My mother frowned, waving me off as if I were interrupting something trivial. "Can't this wait, Daniel?" she hissed before turning back to her friends. I repeated myself louder, my composure slipping. Finally, my father turned to face me, annoyance etched across his features. "What is it now?" he snapped, drawing curious glances from nearby guests. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "Lily has a tumor in her lung. The doctor says she needs immediate surgery. If she doesn't get it, she might not make it." Silence fell briefly around us, but no one asked about Lily. Not even a flicker of concern crossed their faces. Instead, murmurs rippled through the crowd. One guest sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Is this some kind of act? This small-time owner begging for money like a street performer?" Laughter erupted behind me, sharp and cruel. Then Ryan stepped forward, champagne glass in hand, his lips curling into a smirk. "You think you're pitiful, don't you?" he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "If you can't afford to take care of your daughter, maybe you shouldn't have had kids in the first place." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, each syllable laced with mockery. He looked at me as though I were nothing, a failure unworthy of his attention. My knees buckled under the weight of humiliation and despair. I dropped to the floor right there, in front of everyone, pleading, "Please, just help me save her. She's your granddaughter." But instead of sympathy, all I got was silence or worse, ridicule. A woman nearby whispered to her companion, "How pathetic. Can't even support his own family." Another man chuckled, shaking his head. Even my father leaned down, his voice cold as ice. "Get up, Daniel. You're embarrassing yourself and us." Tears blurred my vision as I rose shakily to my feet. I looked at them one last time, the people who were supposed to be my family, and saw only strangers staring back. Their indifference cut deeper than any insult ever could. Without another word, I turned and walked out, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses fading behind me. Outside, the rain poured in torrents, soaking me within seconds. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the empty driveway as I stood frozen on the doorstep. Each drop of rain mingled with the tears streaming down my face, but I couldn't feel anything except the crushing emptiness in my chest. They had chosen a lavish party over their granddaughter's life. They had laughed while I begged. And now, standing alone in the storm, I realized something profound. They weren't my family anymore. After leaving my parents' house that night, soaked to the bone and drowning in despair, I returned to the hospital where Lily lay fighting for every breath. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside me, anger, guilt, and helplessness swirling like a hurricane. But just as I thought all hope was lost, something extraordinary happened. My in-laws arrived early the next morning, their faces etched with worrying but also determination. They didn't say much at first, they simply hugged me tightly, as if trying to transfer their strength into my broken spirit. Later that evening, my father-in-law called me aside. His voice was steady, unwavering. "Daniel, how much more do you need?" I hesitated, reluctant to burden them further, but finally admitted the remaining $40,000 gap. Silence hung heavy between us until my mother-in-law spoke, her voice trembling yet resolute. "We sold our house. Come pick up the money tomorrow." My heart stopped. Their house, the only home they'd ever known, the place filled with 30 years of memories, was gone. For me? For Lily. When I arrived the next day, my mother-in-law handed me an envelope containing the check. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "We can rent another house, Daniel, but our granddaughter only has one chance at life." Her words shattered whatever walls I had left around my heart. I couldn't speak. All I could do was hug her tightly, feeling the weight of their sacrifice press against my chest. These were not my blood relatives, yet they had given up everything to save my child. And it wasn't just them. Back at work, word spread among colleagues about Lily's condition. A young employee named Jake, who had joined the company just 6 months prior, approached me nervously. He pressed $500 into my hand, his voice shaking. "Boss, I don't have much, but this is all I can give. I owe you my life. You gave me a job when no one else would. Please use this to save your daughter." His sincerity brought tears to my eyes. Others followed suit. An old coworker I hadn't spoken to in years sent $3,000 with a note saying, "You saved me once. Let me repay the favor." Every coin, every bill, every small contribution added up, not just financially, but emotionally. In those dark days, When I felt utterly abandoned by my own flesh and blood, strangers and chosen family stepped forward to remind me what true love and loyalty looked like. It wasn't about wealth or status, it was about standing by someone when they needed it most. That realization reignited a flicker of hope within me. Maybe we weren't alone after all. After 8 grueling hours, the operating room doors finally swung open. The surgeon emerged, his face pale with exhaustion but softened by a faint smile. "She's going to make it," he said, his voice steady yet gentle. Those 5 words hit me like a tidal wave. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the cold hospital floor, tears streaming down my face uncontrollably. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe, to truly believe that Lily would live. That night, I sat by her bedside, watching her tiny chest rise and fall with each fragile breath. Her hand, so small and delicate, rested in mine. I traced the outline of her fingers, marveling at how something so fragile could hold so much strength. Leaning closer, I whispered into the quiet room, my voice trembling with emotion, "Daddy's here, sweetheart. You're going to be okay." Then, as if speaking to the universe itself, I made a vow, a promise born from pain and fueled by determination. "I swear, Lily, I will never let anyone look down on us again. We'll rise above every obstacle, no matter what it takes." In that moment, I realized how much I had underestimated myself. The betrayal of my parents, the indifference of those who should have cared, it had all pushed me to a breaking point. But now, it would become my foundation. I would build a life where we wouldn't need anyone's pity or approval, where Emma, Lily, and I could stand tall without fear of judgment. That night, as I held my daughter's hand, I felt a fire ignite within me, a relentless drive to prove not just to them, but to myself, that we were stronger than they ever imagined. After Lily's recovery, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just working to rebuild my life anymore, I was working to prove that I didn't need anyone's charity, especially not from the people who had turned their backs on us when we needed them most. Every day became a battle, every hour a chance to push harder. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. and worked until midnight, surviving on less than 4 hours of sleep. My office became both my sanctuary and my prison. There were days when I skipped meals entirely, to focus on signing contracts or finalizing designs, to even think about food. One afternoon, after weeks of relentless work, I collapsed in the middle of the office. The world spun around me as my body gave out from sheer exhaustion. Emma rushed in, her face pale with fear, and begged me to slow down. "Daniel, you're killing yourself," she pleaded, tears streaming down her cheeks. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was so close to achieving what I had set out to do, to build a future where no one could ever look down on us again. Slowly but surely, the pieces began falling into place. 3 years later, my small interior design firm had transformed into one of the leading companies in the region. Hotels, shopping centers, corporate offices, they all wanted my signature touch. What started as a tiny operation with barely enough clients to cover rent had grown into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. A major real estate corporation approached me with a $2 million contract to redesign their flagship property. It was the biggest deal of my career, and it cemented my status as someone who had risen from nothing to become unstoppable. But the sweetest victory came when my company became a direct competitor to my parents' furniture store, the very business they had once used to flaunt their success. Their carefully curated image began crumbling under the weight of reality. Clients abandoned them, friends distanced themselves, and soon, their once thriving store was struggling to stay afloat. One evening my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Daniel, your father and we've made some mistakes. We need your help. Can we talk about a partnership?" I froze, gripping the phone tightly. A part of me wanted to laugh. How ironic that they were now asking for my help, after everything they'd done. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, I responded, my tone colder than ice. "No, no," she repeated, disbelief evident in her voice. "You heard me," I said firmly. "You chose Ryan's wedding over Lily's life. You abandoned your own granddaughter when she needed you most. Now, you can experience what it feels like to lose everything. Goodbye, Mother." I hung up before she could say another word. That night, as I sat alone in my office overlooking the city skyline, I allowed myself a rare smile. This wasn't just success, it was redemption. For years, I had carried the weight of their rejection, their indifference, their betrayal. Now, I had proven that I didn't need them to succeed. If anything, their cruelty had fueled my determination. They had underestimated me once, and now they would pay the price for it. After everything settled, I couldn't forget the sacrifices made for Lily, especially by my in-laws. They had sold their home, the place where they raised Emma and built decades of memories, to save my daughter's life. It wasn't just generosity, it was love in its purest form. And I vowed silently that one day, I would repay them not out of obligation, but because they deserved every bit of happiness I could give. For months, I secretly tracked down the new owner of their old house. Negotiations weren't easy, the property value had skyrocketed, but I refused to back down. I hired architects and designers to renovate the entire house, transforming it into something even more beautiful than before. When the day came, I invited my in-laws over under the pretense of discussing family plans. As we stood on the porch of their former home, I handed them the keys. My mother-in-law froze, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "Daniel, how? This is our house." I smiled softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You gave me everything when I had nothing. This is the least I can do to repay you." But repaying debts wasn't enough. I wanted to ensure no family would ever feel the despair I once did. Inspired by Lily's recovery, I founded Lily's Hope, a charity dedicated to supporting families with critically ill children who lacked financial resources. The fund provided emergency grants for surgeries, medical treatments, and even temporary housing near hospitals. At the launch event, I shared my story publicly for the first time. When Lily needed help, strangers stepped forward while blood relatives turned away. Today, this foundation exists, so no parent has to beg or kneel to save their child. Every donation poured into Lily's Hope felt like another step toward healing, not just for others, but for myself. In giving back, I found closure. Years passed, and Lily grew into a vibrant, joyful girl who lit up every room she entered. Her laughter echoed through our home like music, a constant reminder of the miracle we had fought so hard to save. One evening, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with those sparkling eyes and said, "Daddy, Grandma and Grandpa are the best people in the whole world." Her words filled my heart with warmth, knowing how much love she felt from them, the same love they had shown us when we needed it most. When Emma announced she was pregnant with our second child, I knew it was time for a fresh start. I bought a larger house not just for our growing family but also to welcome my in-laws permanently. They had sacrificed everything for us, and now it was my turn to give back. The day we moved in together, Lily ran around excitedly, shouting, "Grandma, now you'll be here every single day." Watching her hug my mother-in-law tightly, I realized this was what true family meant: unconditional support, unwavering loyalty, and boundless love. That night, sitting around the dinner table with Emma, Lily, and my in-laws, I reflected on everything we'd been through. Family isn't defined by blood, it's built by actions, by standing beside someone even when the world turns its back. And in this moment, surrounded by the people who truly mattered, I felt complete. It had been years since I last heard from my parents, years of silence, bitterness, and unspoken resentment. So when my phone rang that afternoon, I hesitated before answering. The screen displayed an unknown number, but something deep inside me already knew who it was. "Daniel," her voice cracked as soon as I picked up. It was my mother, the same woman who had watched me kneel in desperation, begging for help to save Lily, only to turn her back without a second thought. Her tone now carried none of its former arrogance. Instead, it trembled with raw panic. "We're losing everything. The house, the cars. The bank is about to seize it all." My grip tightened on the phone. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Memories flooded back: the night they chose Ryan's lavish wedding over Lily's life, the way they laughed at my pleas, the cold indifference etched into their faces. And now here they were, calling me like nothing had happened. My voice came out sharper than I intended. "What about Ryan? Doesn't he have anything to help you?" There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a choked sob. "Ryan, he's bankrupt after the divorce. He has nothing left to give us." The irony hit me like a punch to the gut. Ryan, the golden child, the one they had spent $300,000 on for his extravagant wedding, was now destitute. The same man who once scoffed at my despair, who mocked me for kneeling, was now reduced to nothing. Yet, despite the satisfaction I should have felt, there was no joy, only emptiness. Their downfall wasn't justice, it was tragedy. But why did they think I owed them anything? After everything they'd done, or rather, hadn't done for me and Lily, how could they dare ask for help? I forced myself to stay calm, though my hands shook with anger. "Mom, do you remember the day I begged you for money to save Lily's life? Do you remember what you said?" Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she whispered, barely audible, I know we made mistakes, Daniel. But please, we're desperate. Desperate. The word echoed in my mind, bitter and cruel. They were desperate now, just as I had been then. Except no one had come to their rescue, not even Ryan, the son they had worshipped above all else. The day they came to my office, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, indifference, and perhaps a fleeting flicker of pity. My parents walked in, their once confident demeanor replaced by desperation. My father's face was gaunt, his shoulders slumped, as if carrying the weight of their choices. My mother's hair, now streaked with silver, framed her tear-streaked face. They sat across from me, clutching each other like survivors on the edge of a sinking ship. On my desk lay a black suitcase containing $200,000, their last lifeline. I slid it toward them without a word. The moment they saw the stacks of crisp $100 bills, their eyes widened with disbelief. My father grabbed the case, clutching it tightly as though afraid I might take it back. "Thank you, Daniel," he muttered, his voice trembling. "You finally understand how important family is." I let out a cold, hollow laugh. "No, Dad, you're wrong. Family is important, just not this one." Their faces froze, shock etched into every line. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, my gaze piercing through them. "Do you know why I'm giving you this money today?" My mother shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's not because I pity you. It's not because I want to reconnect. This is the last time we will ever meet. Once you walk out of this room, consider me dead." My mother broke into uncontrollable sobs, while my father clutched the suitcase even tighter, his knuckles white. "Daniel, don't do this. We're your family," she screamed, her voice cracking. I stood up, my expression unyielding. "You chose a party over your granddaughter's life. You abandoned us when we needed you most. Now, you can experience what it feels like to lose everything." As security escorted them out, my mother turned back, shouting, "You can't cut ties completely with your own family." Her words echoed in the room, but my response was calm and final. "You did that first, Mother. When you chose a lavish wedding over Lily's life, you severed our bond forever." The door closed behind them, sealing their fate and mine. For the first time in years, I felt nothing. No anger, no regret, just an emptiness that signaled the end of something long overdue. A year later, as I sat in my office reviewing contracts for a new project, an email notification popped up on my screen. It was from my parents' lawyer, accusing me of neglecting my financial obligations to them. My lips curled into a bitter smile as I read the words. How ironic that they now demanded money after everything they had done. Without hesitation, I forwarded the email to my legal team. They would handle it. I no longer had the energy to deal with their manipulations directly. But late that night, as I stared out the window at the city lights, their accusations lingered in my mind. I knew this wouldn't be the last time they tried to pull me back in. Perhaps next time, they'd claim poverty or use emotional blackmail again. Should I give them another chance? Or should I stand firm and let them face the consequences of their choices? I turn to you, my audience, because your thoughts matter. Did I do the right thing by cutting ties completely? Would forgiveness bring peace or only more pain? If you were in my shoes, what would you do when the people who abandoned you come crawling back, begging for help? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your perspective. After all, stories like this aren't just about me. They're about us, about how we navigate love, betrayal, and redemption.